when the man I married pointed a finger at the door and commanded me to beg for forgiveness or pack my bags. He believed I would fall to my knees. Before we uncover how his arrogance backfired, please subscribe right now so you never miss our daily jaw-dropping stories. That single ultimatum shattered 6 years of silence and forced a choice that left his family in shock. He never expected me to choose freedom over his toxic demands. My name is Sarah, and I was 34 years old when my life completely restarted. My marriage to Ethan looked perfect because he was a hard-working provider who cared about our 3-year-old son Leo. However, beneath the beautiful surface of our lifestyle lay a painful truth that I had ignored for too long. I spent every day walking on eggshells just to maintain peace with the relatives of my husband. The fundamental issue was that Ethan possessed 2 entirely different personalities depending on who entered the room. When we were alone, he acted like an attentive partner, but the second his family walked in, he completely transformed. He immediately ceased being my supportive husband and became their loyal defender, regardless of how they treated me. His mother constantly criticized my choices while Ethan merely stood by and watched. Everything reached a boiling point during a massive summer afternoon gathering at the home of his parents. The backyard was filled with dozens of relatives laughing, eating grilled food, and playing music under the bright sun. My son Leo was sitting peacefully next to me, enjoying fresh fruit when his grandmother marched over with a deep frown. She demanded to know why I was still restricting sugar from the diet of the boy. Instead of accepting my explanation, she rolled her eyes dramatically and loudly announced that my parenting style was completely ridiculous. I felt the familiar warmth of embarrassment rush into my cheeks as the entire backyard grew quiet. Before I could even defend my position, the sister of Ethan named Chloe joined the conversation with a cruel laugh. Chloe remarked that I probably read one internet article and suddenly considered myself an expert. Normally, I would swallow my pride, lower my head, and pretend that the mocking words did not pierce my heart. However, looking down at Leo, I realized that my young son was watching how these people treated his mother. I turned directly to Chloe and stated firmly that following professional medical advice was not something that should be ridiculed. The entire table instantly fell into a heavy silence as my mother-in-law folded her arms tightly. The word disrespectful felt like a physical blow because I was merely standing up for the health of my child. Within minutes, the entire narrative shifted as multiple aunties and cousins joined the discussion to condemn my attitude. They claimed that I was actively attacking the entire family structure instead of just defending my son. I looked over at Ethan, desperately pleading with my eyes for him to intervene or say something to diffuse the situation. Ethan simply sat there in total silence, staring down at his plate, refusing to offer any support at all. When Chloe made another sarcastic comment about how I always ruined every single family celebration, something inside me finally snapped. I did not scream or hurl insults, but I calmly articulated the reality of how 6 years of constant criticism had completely exhausted my spirit. I explained that I was entirely done being the favorite target. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and filled with profound outrage. Ethan suddenly stood up from his chair, his face completely flushed with deep embarrassment and intense anger. He commanded me to stop speaking immediately, but I looked him dead in the eye and refused to back down. The entire backyard became completely silent as Ethan realized he was losing control of the situation in front of his peers. He pointed a trembling finger toward the driveway and delivered the ultimatum that altered our lives forever. He told me to apologize to his mother right now, or pack my things and get out of his sight. Every single relative fully expected me to cry and beg for forgiveness. Instead of surrendering to their expectations, I quietly stood up from the table without uttering a single word. I walked into the house, gathered the belongings of my son, lifted Leo into my arms, and walked directly to my vehicle. There were no dramatic tears, no shouting matches, and no desperate explanations left to give them. As I drove away from that house, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. I realized that the core problem was not just that afternoon, but 6 long years of voluntary emotional abuse. Later that night, after placing Leo safely into his bed, I sat in the darkness of my kitchen reflecting on my future. I suddenly remembered a conversation from 3 years ago when a close friend named Emily offered me a wonderful job at her international firm. At the time, I declined the offer to focus on my marriage, but the circumstances had drastically changed. I sent Emily a late-night message explaining everything. Within an hour, she responded saying the position was still open because the company had recently expanded its operations significantly. They desperately required someone with my exact skill set to start immediately. Over the next 3 days, Emily and I finalized the details of the position through several confidential phone calls. On the 4th evening, I sat in front of my laptop with a pounding heart and purchased 2 international flight tickets. One ticket belonged to me, and the other belonged to my sweet son Leo. For the first time in my adult life, I did not ask for permission. The most challenging aspect of the entire plan was maintaining a completely normal routine during the subsequent 2 weeks. I continued driving Leo to preschool, performing my daily work duties, preparing family dinners, and smiling whenever Ethan entered the room. Behind that calm exterior, I was systematically rebuilding my entire life from scratch with the help of Emily. The new corporate position was located across the ocean in New Zealand, which offered the absolute perfect geographical separation from the toxicity of the extended family of my husband. I spent my lunch breaks managing complex legal documentation, arranging housing accommodations, researching local schools for Leo, and organizing our financial accounts. Every single choice I made during those hectic days rested on whether it would provide a healthier environment for my son. If an action protected his emotional well-being, I executed it immediately without hesitation. Meanwhile, Ethan behaved precisely like the arrogant man he had always been. He genuinely believed that my current silence meant that I was preparing to offer a massive apology to his mother. He began sending brief text messages asking if I was ready to talk and move past the unfortunate incident. He even claimed that his mother felt terrible about the argument, which almost caused me to laugh out loud at the absurdity. It was entirely obvious that nobody cared about my emotional state, as they only worried about preserving their own comfort. His sister Chloe sent texts emphasizing the supreme importance of family unity. I chose to ignore every single message because silence is a powerful shield against manipulation. When 3 weeks had passed, every single detail of my relocation strategy was flawlessly executed and ready for deployment. On the final evening before our scheduled departure, Ethan arrived home carrying a bag of takeout food from my absolute favorite local restaurant. This was his traditional method of offering peace without ever actually apologizing. We sat together at the kitchen table while our son slept soundly on the upper floor of the house. Ethan looked at me and stated that we had dragged this silent treatment out long enough. I looked at his face and quietly agreed that the situation had indeed reached its natural conclusion. He smiled with immense satisfaction, fully convinced that he had won yet another battle of wills against his wife. The following morning, while Ethan was away at his corporate job, Leo and I quietly boarded a ride to the airport. Before shutting the front door forever, I placed a detailed letter on the kitchen counter. The letter contained no insults, but it clearly explained that I refused to teach our son to accept disrespect. My mobile phone began vibrating uncontrollably while we were walking through the intense security checkpoint. Ethan had clearly discovered the letter on the counter, and my screen filled with dozens of missed calls and frantic text messages. I refused to answer his calls until we were safely seated on the massive airplane. When I finally answered, his voice sounded entirely different, stripped of all his usual confidence and replaced with pure panic. He demanded to know if I was actually abandoning our marriage. I looked out the small window at the endless white clouds beneath the airplane and calmly confirmed my departure. He screamed that my actions were completely insane, but I replied that true insanity was expecting me to spend the next 20 years apologizing for having personal boundaries. For the first time since the day we met, Ethan had absolutely no counter-argument to offer. He sat in stunned silence. The initial months in a brand new country were incredibly difficult, as establishing a fresh life always requires immense effort. However, away from the constant criticism of his grandmother, Leo began to flourish into a highly confident and relaxed child. The massive physical distance also forced Ethan to confront the painful realities he had ignored for our entire marriage. Without the loud voices of his family drowning out reality, he could see. He eventually issued a genuine apology to me for years of choosing his comfort over his courage. His mother and sister eventually apologized as well, but only after realizing they possessed zero control. Today, my communication with Ethan is healthier, because firm boundaries finally exist. When my husband told me to apologize or leave, he truly believed he was punishing me. He never realized he was giving me a choice, and choosing myself changed my entire destiny. Looking back at the entire experience, the most critical element was not the plane ticket or the new country. It was finally understanding that respect is not something a person should ever have to beg to receive. True peace can only be achieved when you possess the courage to walk away from people who refuse to value you.